It started with a photograph. Two girls standing in a wheat field, hands clasped, light bending off their matching barrettes. The Holloway twins. They disappeared in the summer of 1963, leaving a town to rot in its own reflection. 60 years later, a sealed box found behind a church organ turns the silence inside out. Inside, film reels, a torn sheriff's badge, and a note that reads, "They never left the orchard." If you've ever wondered what truth costs after everyone stops asking for it, keep watching. If stories of vanished children, buried confessions, and towns that keep their ghosts interest you, subscribe. July 1963. The Holloway farm sat at the far edge of town where the dirt road thinned into meadow. That morning, heat shimmered like breath above the grass, and the twins, Lila and Rose, were chasing fireflies that hadn't realized dawn had come. Their mother, June, stood on the porch with a glass of lemonade sweating in her hand. "Stay where I can see you," she called. The girls laughed in unison, the sound overlapping until it became one voice. At 8:14 a.m., a neighbor driving past saw them by the orchard fence, the world bright behind them. By 8:30, the fence gate swung open, and the yard was empty. When June Holloway found the ribbon tangled in the grass, she thought it was just the wind that had taken them. By noon, half of Ashford Hollow was combing the riverbank. By nightfall, they'd found only a single shoe in the creek and a smear of red paint on a stone. Sheriff Walter Bennett promised the press it was an active investigation. The next day, he boarded up the orchard gate and told the parents to stop looking. No bodies, no ransom, no suspects. Just two names carved into every prayer said in town for the next 60 years. The rain began the day Mara Keene returned to Ashford Hollow. Not a storm, just that slow, deliberate drizzle that slicks old paint and wakes forgotten smells. Wet wood, rust, and something sweet underneath. She parked outside the county records office, engine ticking, and watched the courthouse clock struggle toward noon. For 20 years she'd worked homicide in the State Bureau. Now she was supposed to consult on cold cases that nobody really wanted opened. The call came from Deputy Alan Greer. Young, nervous, eager for ghosts. "Ma'am, we found something behind the pipe organ at St. Agnes. Looks like evidence she'd driven 3 hours through fog because she knew that tone, the thin edge between curiosity and dread." Inside the church, light dripped through stained glass in bruised colors. On the front pew sat a cardboard box, damp at the corners. Greer lifted the lid carefully, as if afraid the past might lunge. Inside were old film reels gone the color of nicotine, 2 Polaroids, and a notebook wrapped in waxed paper like something meant for burial, not storage. The first photo showed the Holloway twins in matching dresses, standing before the orchard fence. The second showed only the fence, empty, but in the corner, half cut off by the frame, a man's shadow. Mara felt the air thin. She'd grown up 30 miles from here. Her mother used to whisper the story of the mirror twins, the ones who talked in unison and vanished between heartbeats. Greer cleared his throat. "The priest says the box has been there since they rebuilt the organ in 78. We found the note under it." He handed her a folded page, edges soft from humidity. "They never left the orchard." The handwriting looped gently, almost feminine. Mara studied the photo again. Behind the girls, the trees leaned like witnesses. The date stamped in the corner read, July 22nd, 1963, 3 days after the official disappearance. She exhaled slowly. Either someone faked this decades ago, or the timeline the whole town lived by was wrong. Outside, thunder muttered beyond the hills. "Seal everything," she said. "We'll catalog it in the morning." As she turned to leave, the organ groaned. A single deep note, though no one touched the keys. Greer flinched. "Wind," she said, though there was none. That night, in her motel room off Route 9, Mara laid the photos on the desk under the weak lamp. Rain tapped the window like someone rehearsing a confession. She traced the edges of the photograph with her thumb. The orchard behind the girls seemed alive, branches bending slightly differently each time she blinked. She told herself it was the flicker of the lamp. But when she looked again, the shadow that had stood at the edge of the frame was gone. Morning came gray and slow, the kind of light that never commits to being day. Detective Mara Keene parked her cruiser at the edge of the Holloway orchard just after 7. Dew clung to the tall grass like sweat, and the trees stood in ordered rows that felt more like gravestones than fruit-bearers. The Holloway farm had been sold and resold over the decades. No one lived here now, just a caretaker who came twice a year to trim what hadn't yet died. The gate sagged under its own rust. A hand-painted sign still read, Holloway Peaches. Since 1947, though nothing sweet had grown here since that summer the twins vanished. Mara stepped through the gate, camera in hand. The ground was soft, giving slightly with each step. The orchard smelled faintly of rot and pollen, like a memory that had spoiled but refused to disappear. The file had said the girls were last seen by the fence, near the north rows. Yet the photo from the box showed them deeper inside, almost at the tree line. She followed the narrow path shown in the image, counting paces. At the 12th tree, she stopped. The bark was scored with deep grooves, as if someone had carved initials there long ago. She brushed away moss with her glove. L+R-7/22/63. Her chest tightened. The same date as the photo. A breeze moved through the branches, the sound low and whispering. It almost shaped itself into voices. 2 of them, high and overlapping, like a memory caught between frequencies. She took a step back, forcing herself to breathe. Wind, she murmured again. A crunch of gravel behind her broke the trance. She turned. Deputy Greer stood by the gate, a paper bag of coffee and bagels in hand. His boots left dark prints in the dew. Didn't expect you this early, he said. I wanted the light, she answered, tucking her camera back into its case. Where's the priest? Father Laird? Said he'd meet us after morning mass. Claims he didn't know the box existed. But I think he's lying. Why? Greer hesitated. Because when I mentioned it, he said, not again, before I told him what it was. Mara nodded slowly. She crouched near the base of the carved tree. The soil was looser here, dark, turned, and uneven. She pulled on gloves. Get me a trowel. Greer blinked. You think? I think something was buried here. Maybe more than once. Together they dug, careful and silent. The wet earth gave way easily, clumping around the metal edge. A few inches down, the trowel struck something hard. Not bone, not stone, metal. They cleared away the dirt until the object emerged. A small tin lunchbox, the kind children carried to school in the early 60s, the paint long since blistered by time. Greer exhaled. Holy hell. Bag it, she said softly. Back at the county lab that afternoon, the box sat under fluorescent light. The lid resisted at first, then gave with a rasping sigh. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay a child's silver bracelet engraved with 2 names, Lila and Rose. Beneath it, a folded photograph, stuck together by moisture. Mara teased it open carefully. It showed the twins again, same dresses, same field. But this time, their faces weren't turned toward the camera. They were looking past it, eyes fixed on something or someone behind the lens. In the corner of the frame, a shadow stretched long and distorted, hand-shaped, reaching toward them. Greer swore under his breath. Could just be a branch. Branches don't cast hands, she said quietly. The lab tech leaned in. You want us to run the soil for decomposition compounds? Do it. And cross-check the bracelet engraving with any personal effects in the 1963 file. Greer studied her face. You think someone dug this up and reburied it? She nodded. More than once. Whoever left that box behind the church, maybe they wanted to make sure it was found. That night, Mara sat in her motel room again, staring at the bracelet through its evidence bag. The engraving shimmered faintly in the lamplight, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw fresh fingerprints along the edge. Small, like a child's. But when she blinked, they were gone. The rain started again after midnight. She left the lamp on. Sleep felt like something she no longer trusted. Ashford Hollow's church was older than most of its parishioners. The brick walls bowed inward from decades of humidity, and the bell tower leaned slightly, as though listening for something it could no longer hear. Detective Mara Keene arrived just before dusk. The last of the congregation was filing out, umbrellas tapping against the worn stone steps. Inside, candles burned low, their flames bowing to every draft. Father Laird waited near the confessional. He was in his 70s, small-framed, his collar crooked, his hands trembling slightly. When he saw Mara, he smiled the kind of smile priests wear at funerals, tired, knowing. "Detective Keene," he said, "I expected you sooner." She studied him. "You knew I'd come?" He motioned for her to sit in the front pew. When men of the law start asking about ghosts, it usually means the town's lies have started leaking, he said. Ashford Hollow's been damp for 60 years. Mara sat, folding her coat beside her. "You were here in 63. I was newly ordained. Still believed every sin had a tidy confession attached." He looked toward the altar. "The Holloway girls, they were my first funeral service without bodies. Their mother wouldn't let me say gone. She said borrowed, borrowed," Mara repeated softly. He nodded. "That word stayed with me." She pulled the photo from a folder, the one with the twins and the reaching shadow. "We found this in a box behind your organ." Laird's hands stilled. His eyes flicked to the image, then away. "I hoped it had been lost for good." "Who put it there?" He was quiet for a long moment. The rain tapped against stained glass, making the saints shimmer as if they breathed. "Walter Bennett," he said finally. "The sheriff at the time. He brought it to me the winter after the search ended. Said he couldn't keep it in evidence, too many eyes. He told me to guard it, to keep the town from tearing itself apart. Did he tell you what it meant?" Laird's gaze dropped to his clasped hands. "He said the photo wasn't what it seemed, that the twins weren't alone that morning, and that the camera had caught something no one should see." Mara leaned closer. "Who was in the orchard with them?" He hesitated, then whispered, "The sheriff's own son." Her pulse quickened. "You're sure?" Laird nodded. "I remember because the boy, Paul Bennett, used to serve at Mass. Quiet child, always watching. The day after the twins vanished, he and his father stopped attending service. Then one night, the sheriff came to me drunk, shaking. He said, 'They followed him. They followed him, and I can't get them back.'" Mara's throat tightened. "Followed him where?" "Into the orchard," Laird said. "He told me he'd gone there to fetch them himself. But when he arrived, there was only the boy's bicycle and the sound of laughter from somewhere underground." The priest's voice trembled. "He said the ground moved." Mara stared at the candles, their wax pooling like tears. "Why bury the box behind the organ?" "Because he thought the church could hold the guilt until he died." Laird's voice dropped to a whisper. "When they rebuilt the organ in 78, I told them not to touch that wall. But they did. Maybe that's why you're here now." Outside, thunder rolled low across the hills. Mara slipped the photo back into its folder. "Father, if I reopen this case, everything you've hidden comes with it. You understand that?" He nodded, resigned. "Ashford's been living on borrowed mercy for 60 years. Maybe it's time the debt was paid." She rose to leave. "If you think of anything else—" "There is one thing," he interrupted. 3 weeks after the girls vanished, someone left a confession in the drop box. No name. Just 5 words. They never stopped singing down there. I thought it was nonsense then. Mara met his eyes. And now? He looked toward the dark mouth of the confessional. Now, I think it was a warning. That night, Mara drove to the old sheriff's house on the edge of town. The property had been sold years ago, but the house still stood, its windows boarded, paint peeling like old skin. She parked under a flickering streetlight, rain thickening to a steady sheet. For a moment she thought she saw movement behind one of the boards. A shift of shadow, quick, deliberate. She blinked, and it was gone. Her phone buzzed. Greer's voice came through taut. Lab reports back. The soil from the orchard, it's mixed with ash. Like something burned there before the burial, Mara's hand tightened on the wheel. Ash from what? Human remains, they think. Partial. She looked back at the house. In the distance, thunder cracked again, echoing like a door slamming shut. Stay at the station, she said. We're not done digging. As she hung up, lightning flashed across the field. For a second, the reflection in her side mirror showed 2 small figures standing by the orchard gate. When she turned, the road was empty. The Bennett house sat on the outskirts of town where the pavement broke apart and let the past bleed through in dust. It was a 2-story relic of 1950s ambition. White siding, sagging porch. The kind of place where secrets could ferment undisturbed. Detective Mara Keene parked by the gate just after dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and glistening, as though the night had been rinsed but not forgiven. She climbed the porch steps, the wood creaking under her weight. The front door was chained shut, a for sale sign hanging crooked from one nail. Through the cracked window she could see the living room, dust motes turning in a shaft of light, furniture ghosting beneath sheets. She pressed her palm against the glass. Cold. The house smelled faintly of oil and mildew. Paul Bennett had left Ashford Hollow decades ago. According to the record, he'd spent years drifting. 2 marriages, 1 arrest for trespassing, no forwarding address. Then, in 1991, a hospital intake form placed him in a psychiatric facility outside St. Louis. Discharged after 6 months. Vanished again. Mara jotted the address in her notebook. She had every intention of following that trail. But first, she needed to know what was still hidden here. She circled to the back, found a broken window, and stepped inside. The air was thick, dry, unmoved in years. Her flashlight caught the outline of family photos on the wall, faces turned sepia under grime. Sheriff Walter Bennett, square-jawed and proud, his wife in pearls. Their son, maybe 12, smiling too tightly, his hands behind his back as if hiding something. She moved deeper into the house. Dust lay on the furniture like ash. In the study, papers were scattered across the floor. Old reports, faded receipts, a torn map of the orchard with X's marked near the northern rows. Then she saw it. A locked drawer in the sheriff's desk. She knelt, working it open with a penknife. Inside was a bundle of letters bound by string and a single Polaroid. The photo showed Paul Bennett as a young man, standing by a shallow pit in the orchard, his face half in shadow, eyes wide, distant. Behind him, barely visible, the outline of 2 small figures, transparent as fog. Mara felt her pulse slow. The photograph wasn't an exposure error. The twins' shapes were faint but deliberate, their hands clasped, their expressions unreadable. She slipped the photo into an evidence sleeve. One of the letters had a date. August 1963. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, as though written in haste. Father, I didn't mean for them to follow me. The ground kept calling after dark. You said to stay away from the roots, but they sang, and I couldn't shut it out. When they went quiet, I thought it was over. But the orchard still moves at night. Mara closed her eyes. The air felt thinner now, her breath catching in it. From somewhere deeper in the house came a slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. She froze, listening. The sound came again, faint but rhythmic. She followed it through the hallway to a door leading down into the basement. The handle was rusted, the wood swollen. She pulled it open. Cold air breathed up from below, thick with damp earth. The knocking had stopped. Her flashlight beam caught a series of carvings on the wall by the stairs, small, crude lines etched with a blade. Dozens of them. Counting marks. She descended carefully, 1 step at a time. The basement was low-ceilinged, the walls unfinished. A single bulb hung overhead, its chain swaying slightly, though no air stirred. At the far end, beneath a sheet of cracked concrete, something bulged. She crouched, brushed the dust away. The surface was uneven, patched clumsily. The color of the cement didn't match. She stood and dialed Greer. "Bring the ground-penetrating radar," she said. "I think Bennett sealed something down here." "What kind of something?" She looked again at the cracked slab, at the faint outlines beneath it that might have been nothing, or 2 small shapes side by side. "Human," she said quietly, "and maybe not alone." When she hung up, her flashlight flickered. For an instant, the beam caught movement by the stairs, 2 child-sized figures standing just beyond the light's edge. She blinked, and the space was empty. Only dust, swirling in the shape of breath. Outside, the sky had begun to pale, dawn pushing through the clouds. Mara stepped onto the porch and watched mist curl across the orchard in the distance. The case was opening itself now, 1 layer at a time, like an old wound remembering how to bleed. By the time Deputy Greer arrived, dawn had turned to a colorless morning. The Bennett house crouched in the fog, like it had been waiting all these years for someone to come back and listen. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand, her eyes on the open basement door. The smell of earth and rust lingered up from below. Greer came in carrying the ground-penetrating radar unit, its screen dark until he flicked it on. The device hummed to life, green lines pulsing across its display. "Basement's colder than the rest of the house," he muttered. "Feels like it's holding its breath." "Then let's see what it's hiding," she said. They descended the stairs. The concrete floor looked calm enough, but something about it didn't feel still. The uneven patch glimmered faintly where Mara had brushed away the dust. Greer ran the scanner slowly across the surface. The machine whined and began to spit static. "Signal interference," he said, frowning. "Shouldn't happen underground." "Keep going." The lines on the display shifted, forming faint outlines. 2 narrow shapes side by side. Then, deeper, something larger, indistinct. Maybe metal. Greer swallowed hard. "Looks like—" "Yeah, 2 cavities. Could be remains." Mara crouched, fingertips grazing the concrete. It was cracked along a faint seam, as if someone had poured it hastily over softer ground. "Get the forensics team." We opened it carefully while they waited. She explored the rest of the basement. Old furniture leaned against the walls, and an oil lamp hung crooked from a beam. On a workbench, she found a rusted tape recorder with a spool of black film wound around its spindle. She brushed it clean. "Bennett kept something down here," she murmured. Greer joined her. Could be old confession tapes, or evidence he didn't want anyone to hear. When the forensics truck arrived, 2 technicians descended the stairs with careful, measured movements. They set to work chipping the edges of the concrete, each strike echoing through the small room like a heartbeat. Mara watched, jaw tight. She had seen exhumations before, but this one felt personal, like the house itself was reluctant to give anything up. The first patch broke free, releasing a puff of cold, stale air. Beneath the slab, dark soil gaped open. The stench hit a second later. Damp rot, old wood, and something faintly metallic. One of the techs leaned closer. "Ma'am, you might want to see this." She stepped forward. 2 small bundles lay in the dirt. wrapped in what had once been white cloth, the fabric the same size and careful fold as something a mother might pack for a sleepover. Time had eaten through the fabric, revealing the curve of bone, delicate as bird wings. Greer turned away, his jaw tightening. "They're about the right size," the tech said softly. 10, maybe 11 years old. Mara nodded. "Bag and label everything. Treat the area as active evidence." She crouched again, her light catching something just beyond the bones, a glint of metal. She reached in carefully, fingers brushing cool iron. It was a key, small and ornate, the kind used for jewelry boxes or diaries. She held it up to the light. A faint engraving along its spine read L and R. Her chest tightened. Lila and Rose. The forensics team began sealing the remains. Outside, sirens wailed distantly as local police arrived to cordon off the area. The fog had thickened, pressing close against the windows. Greer looked pale. "You think the sheriff killed them?" "I think the sheriff found them," Mara said quietly, "and maybe someone else made sure the truth stayed buried." They carried the evidence boxes up into the daylight. Reporters had already begun to gather, drawn by the smell of resurrection. Mara stood on the porch, looking toward the orchard in the distance. The rows of trees shimmered under the weak sun, their shadows long and uneven. She could almost hear children laughing, soft, overlapping, just beyond the wind's reach. That night, in the lab, she played the recovered tape recorder. It took several tries before the old machine caught, the reel turning with a dry click. A man's voice came through, shaky, exhausted. "Walter Bennett. This is Sheriff Bennett, August 3rd, 1963. The search is done. We found the pit. God forgive me, I sealed it myself. I had to. The ground wouldn't stay still. Paul kept saying they sang to him. I heard it too. In the roots, like something wanting out. I told him not to dig, but he went back. Said they were calling his name. When I pulled him out, he was smiling. He said, 'They're still down there.'" The tape hissed, the voice breaking into static. Then, faintly, another sound layered beneath it, soft and high-pitched. A child's hum, repeating, like a lullaby half-remembered. Mara stopped the tape. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound. She stared at the reel spinning down and whispered to the empty room, "What did you bury, Sheriff?" Morning broke thin and colorless. Rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of it. Wet asphalt, iron, and the faint sweetness of rotting leaves. Mara Keene hadn't slept. The tape recorder sat on the motel desk beside a half-drunk cup of coffee and the plastic evidence sleeve that held the orchard key. She'd replayed the sheriff's voice until the hiss between his words began to sound like breathing. At 3 a.m., she heard something she hadn't noticed before, beneath the childlike humming. A second voice, fainter, male, whispering words that blurred in the static. She rewound, leaned close, listening again. The whisper was rhythmic, counting maybe, or reciting something. 1, 2, under the roots. Then silence. By sunrise, she was already driving toward the station. Deputy Greer was waiting at his desk, looking worse for sleep than she was. He handed her a file. "Preliminary analysis on the Bennett tape," he said. "Audio tech cleaned it up. There's definitely 2 voices. One's the sheriff, the other's male, maybe late teens. The timestamp on the tape stock puts it at least 10 years newer than 63, so the recording wasn't made when he said it was," Mara murmured. "Right. Could have been him confessing later, or somebody imitating him." She flipped through the report. The spectrogram showed parallel frequencies, one steady, one flickering, almost melodic. "The humming matches the pitch range of a child," Greer added. "A girl, maybe 2 overlapping takes." Mara stared at the waveform, her thumb pressing against the paper until it wrinkled. 2 voices, 2 girls. She spent the morning cross-referencing missing person records and psychiatric admissions. Paul Bennett's file was thin but strange. 6 months at St. Dunstan Hospital. Release under supervision of a private sponsor who never signed a full name, just the initials J.H. At noon, she drove to the county archives. The clerk, an old woman with half-moon glasses, pulled the microfilm without asking questions. "Everybody comes for the Holloway girls eventually," she said. "They always think they'll find something new." The reel clicked through the viewer. Newspaper clippings swam across the glass. Front pages, interviews, the sheriff's photo under headlines that read, "Local twins feared drowned. No bodies found." Then another article, almost hidden. Bennett boy questioned, released. No details, just a quote from Sheriff Bennett himself. "My son has suffered enough." Mara sat back, the machine humming softly. Outside, the courthouse clock struck 1. Back at the motel, she placed the recorder on the desk again and pressed play. The sheriff's confession rolled forward, his breath shaky, words falling like loose nails. Then the whisper returned, clearer now after digital cleanup. "She said she'd show me the hole. Said the light was singing. Said if I listened, I'd see them again." The voice wasn't the sheriff's. It was younger. Paul Bennett. A cold line traced down her spine. She paused the tape, staring at the recorder as if it might answer her. Her phone rang. Greer's voice came through, breathless. "Detective, you might want to see this. We checked the fingerprints on the key you found, and?" "They match the prints on the film canister from the church box. But the lab says the oil residues are fresh, less than a week old." Mara looked at the key on the desk. The metal caught the lamplight like a blink. "That's impossible," she said. "Those boxes were sealed for 45 years. Unless someone reopened them," Greer said. Silence stretched between them. That night, Mara returned to the orchard. The county had strung yellow tape across the gate, but the fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the warnings. She ducked under and followed the path between the trees. The ground was slick, the air still. At the 12th tree, the one with the carved initials, she stopped. The hole the forensics team had dug was covered by a tarp. Beneath it, the soil pulsed faintly with pooled rainwater, reflecting the branches above like veins. She knelt, pressing her palm to the ground. It felt warm. The tape's whisper echoed in her head. Under the roots. Somewhere nearby, a low sound rose, half wind, half voice. It carried through the orchard, high and thin, a hum, the same note from the tape, soft as breathing. Mara stood slowly. The sound grew clearer, almost forming words now, and for a moment she thought she heard her own name threaded inside it. The fog thickened. Between the trees, 2 silhouettes flickered, small, motionless, hand in hand. Then they were gone. Only the wind remained, whispering through the leaves like the static on an old recording. The next morning, the orchard was a crime scene again. Detective Mara Keene arrived just as the sun crested the ridge, its light bleeding through mist that smelled of damp soil and something older, something sweet and metallic that lingered in the back of the throat. County deputies had already ringed the property with tape and floodlights. The tarp covering the excavation fluttered in the wind. Greer met her by the gate. His face was drawn, eyes rimmed red from too little sleep. "You'll want to see this," he said. "We ran deeper scans. There's another void beneath the first burial site. How deep? 3 meters. Maybe more. It's irregular, not a coffin shape. More like a tunnel." Mara's stomach turned. "Show me." They descended the muddy slope. The forensics team had already started widening the dig, metal shovels glinting under the pale morning light. The earth here was softer than it should have been, too soft for ground that hadn't been disturbed in decades. The lead tech knelt by the edge. "We found what looks like structural wood, old support beams, hand-cut. Could be part of a root cellar, Maybe a forgotten storm shelter. Mara stared at the dark cavity yawning beneath them. Or maybe something built to hide. She climbed down, boots sinking into the slick mud. The air that rose from the hole was colder than the morning air around it. Not just cold, still, like the breath of something that had been waiting. When she ducked beneath the first beam, her flashlight swept over soil-stained boards. A ladder rotted to splinters, and, half buried in the corner, a child's shoe. Blue leather. The same make as the twins, in the case file photos. Her hand trembled as she brushed it free. Inside the shoe was something hard. She tipped it over. A marble rolled out, blue glass swirling with white clouds. She remembered the sheriff's tape. They sang to him. "What the hell is this place?" Greer whispered. Mara's light moved across the far wall. Symbols had been carved into the wood. Circles, intersecting lines, numbers repeating. 1, 2, 1, 2. Over and over, etched deep enough to splinter. The lead tech leaned close. "Looks ritualistic," or obsessive. Mara knelt, tracing one line with her glove. It wasn't random. The carving followed a rhythm, almost musical. A pulse, as if whoever made it was keeping time with something only they could hear. Beneath the markings, her light caught a second object wedged in the soil. A metal tag. She pried it free. Engraved on it were the initials J.H., the same initials from Paul Bennett's hospital discharge papers. She stared at the tag until the letters blurred. He wasn't just a patient, she murmured. He had help. Someone on the outside. Greer exhaled. Maybe the sponsor. Maybe the reason he never came back. They sealed the objects and climbed out, the morning wind slicing through the trees. Reporters were gathering at the road again, their cameras flashing like the orchard was a living thing they could trap in still frames. By afternoon, the tunnel had been fully exposed. What they thought was a root cellar descended another 15 feet into the dark, the floor packed with debris. Glass jars, splintered boards, and dozens of small bones, animal and otherwise. The coroner called her over. "Most of this is wildlife," he said, voice low. "But there's something else mixed in, phalanges, human, child size. And see this?" He held up a fragment of paper sealed under plastic. A torn scrap of a photograph, the corner of an image, the edge of a white dress, and just visible, the curl of a small hand holding something round. A marble. That night, Mara sat alone in her motel room again. Rain tapped against the window, faint and restless. The recorder sat on the table where she'd left it, silent now. She pressed play anyway. The sheriff's voice returned, cracked and uneven. Then came the younger voice. Paul's. They said the ground would listen. That if I told it what I'd done, it would keep it safe. But it started whispering back, said I wasn't done yet. Mara stopped the tape. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The ground listening, the carvings, the tunnel. She closed her eyes, hearing again the hum that had drifted through the orchard the night before. It wasn't imagination. It was memory, a sound the land had learned to keep repeating. When she opened her eyes, something gleamed on the floor by the door. A wet footprint. Small. Bare. She stood slowly, following the prints across the room to the window. The curtain stirred though the glass was closed. Outside, fog pressed against the pane, shapes shifting just beyond view. Two silhouettes, holding hands, then gone. The hum faded, leaving only the sound of the rain, soft as breathing. Rain gave way to low fog that clung to the valley for days. It pressed the color out of everything. Sky, road, even memory. Detective Mara Keene drove the narrow county lane toward what had once been St. Dunstan Hospital for the Infirm and Disturbed, where Paul Bennett had spent 6 months after the summer of the twins' disappearance. The building rose out of the fog like something half forgotten by the earth. 4 stories of stone. Roof collapsed in places, ivy twisting through its broken windows. County property records said the hospital had closed in 1975 after a fire destroyed its archives. But someone had been inside recently. A trail of boot prints, fresh in the mud, led to the back door. Mara unholstered her flashlight and pushed through. The corridor smelled of mildew and ammonia, the air heavy with the metallic tang of old wiring and decay. Wallpaper peeled in sheets. Graffiti scrawled along the hallway read, "Listen to the ground." Her beam caught a metal sign half hanging from a nail. Ward C, Experimental Therapy Wing. She moved carefully, her footsteps echoing too loudly. In the therapy ward, most rooms were empty. Beds rusted, equipment collapsed under dust. But at the end of the hall, one door was locked from the outside with a thick chain. A metal tag hung from the latch. JH. Her breath caught. She knelt, examining the door. The hinges were newer than the frame, replaced maybe a decade ago. Someone had secured this long after the hospital shut down. She tried the lock. It gave with a reluctant groan. Inside was a small, windowless chamber. The walls were lined with soundproof padding. On the floor sat a single reel-to-reel recorder connected to an old battery unit. Beside it, a box of magnetic tapes labeled by date. August 3rd, 1963, PB number 1, August 6th, 1963, PB number 2, AUG 10, 1963, Roots, Auditory. Mara stared at the handwriting, thin, deliberate, clinical. She switched on the recorder. The machine crackled, the tape spinning slow. A male voice filled the room, measured, calm, professional. Session 2. Subject Paul Bennett. Audible hallucinations persist. Claims voices emerge from soil near the Holloway orchard. Attempts to record them unsuccessful. Subject states the girls speak in color. Requests to go home. Mara's heart thudded. The next voice was Paul's, quiet, slurred by sedation. They said we'd all forget if I helped. But the ground doesn't forget. It's still breathing down there, the doctor again. Who told you that, Paul? A pause. Then, barely audible. My sponsor. Static overtook the tape. Mara shut it off, throat dry. The label on the recorder bore a faded sticker, property of Willow Creek Research Institute. The same agency name that had appeared on the back of the Willow prototype camera she'd heard about in the Dillard case file a year earlier. Her pulse quickened. Willow Creek, she whispered. They were connected. Outside, the fog pressed hard against the broken windows. Mara gathered the tapes into her evidence bag and stepped back into the hall. But as she turned toward the exit, her light caught fresh footprints in the dust. Boot prints, larger than hers, leading toward the staircase. Someone else was here. She moved quietly, following the sound of movement above. The second floor groaned as if under shifting weight. Her light swept across a row of open doors. At the far end, a figure stood half-turned toward her, a man in a gray overcoat, face pale under the flashlight beam. "Agent Mora," she said, startled. He raised a hand. "Easy, you shouldn't be here alone." "I could say the same," she said, lowering the light slightly. "How did you know I was here?" "I didn't," he said, voice even. "Your car's parked halfway off the road. Thought you might need backup." He stepped closer. His shoes left no sound. Mara gestured toward the bag. "I found the Bennett tapes, and whoever JH was, he worked for something called Willow Creek Research." Mora's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You shouldn't take those out of here. They're classified material." "Classified? It's a missing child case." His eyes flicked toward the hallway behind her. "Some things weren't meant to be reopened, Detective. That's how people disappear." She studied him. The fluorescent light from the windowless corridor made his skin look gray, hollow. "What did you do to the man who sent you?" she asked quietly. He smiled without warmth. "Same thing he did to everyone else. Took their pictures and filed them away." He stepped aside. Leave the tapes. Walk out. Pretend you never found this place. She shook her head. Not this time. For a long moment they stood facing each other, the hum of old wiring between them. Then he lowered his gaze. I tried to warn you. The light flickered once. When it steadied again, he was gone. Only the dust disturbed where he'd stood. Mara's breath came fast. She ran to the stairwell, but it was empty. Wind moved through the broken windows, carrying faint whispers that might have been her name, or just the building sighing under its own weight. Back in her car, she locked the doors and sat shaking until the rain began again. The tapes lay on the seat beside her like sleeping things. She didn't start the engine for a long time. The hospital loomed behind her in the rearview mirror, its windows reflecting a dim light from somewhere deep inside, steady, pulsing, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The storm burned itself out overnight, leaving the air raw and electric. Detective Mara Keene hadn't gone home. She'd spent the dark hours parked outside the Ashford County Sheriff's Office, replaying the Bennett tapes until dawn silvered the dashboard. Each listen left her more certain. The Willow Creek Institute had not been studying madness. They'd been listening for something beneath it. Inside, the station hummed with early morning noise. Phones, printers, the tired shuffle of uniforms, pretending not to notice the cold case detective who had dragged the town's oldest wound back into daylight. Greer handed her a mug of coffee. You look like you argued with God and lost. I found Willow Creek's name on the hospital recorder, she said. They had Paul Bennett in an auditory stimulus study. That's what experimental therapy meant. Greer frowned. They were scientists. Government contractors. 1950s through the 70s. Claimed to be mapping trauma through sound and light frequencies. Early prototype cameras, tape analysis. Stuff meant to record more than the eye could see. More than energy, resonance, maybe memory itself. Greer rubbed a hand over his jaw. And you think they used the twins? I think they were the test. She pulled a folded paper from her coat, an old memo she'd photographed at St. Dunstan's before leaving. Project Willow/Field Series. B subject pairing required for synchronized frequency response. Location, Holloway Orchard, July 1963. The date sat like a bruise on the page. Greer whispered, Jesus. Mara's phone buzzed before she could answer. Unknown number. A woman's voice, calm, measured. Detective Keene, this line isn't secure, so I'll be brief. You took materials from St. Dunstan's. They belong to us. Who is this? Dr. Judith Harlan, the voice said. The initials J.H. You've reopened something that was never meant to be understood. Mara's pulse jumped. You were Paul Bennett's sponsor. A pause, then. I was his handler. He heard them first. The twins weren't victims, they were conductors. You'll understand when you play the last reel. The call clicked dead. Greer stared. Handler. Mara swallowed the metallic taste rising in her throat. She's still alive. They traced the call to a rural exchange 20 miles west, near the defunct Willow Creek facility. The road there cut through pine forest and ended at a chain-link fence draped in warning signs that had long since faded. Inside the perimeter, buildings leaned into decay. Research labs gutted, windows blown out, the air sharp with ozone and mold. They entered the main hall. A generator somewhere deep inside clicked to life, spilling a thin blue light across the floor. Rows of photograph negatives hung from wires like dark laundry. Each frame showed the orchard under different filters. Infrared, ultraviolet, spectral composites, and in every one, two faint shapes stood between the trees. Greer's voice shook. They were photographing sound. Mara walked to the far wall, where a chalkboard still bore equations, notations about wave harmonics/biological resonance. Beneath it, a phrase scrawled in white. Memory is a frequency. Death is just what happens when no one tunes it out. A metal cabinet stood open. Inside, a single reel of film labeled Willow B/Final. She loaded it into a surviving projector. The bulb flickered, the film catching with a low whir. On the screen, the Holloway orchard, black and white, windless. Two girls standing hand in hand, faces turned toward the camera. Behind them, Sheriff Bennett and another man, Dr. Harlan, adjusting equipment. The girls smiled. The air around them shimmered. Then the image rippled as if the film itself exhaled. The soundtrack hissed, and a low tone began to hum through the projector speaker. Deep, rhythmic, almost musical. The girls' mouths opened, matching the frequency, and the trees behind them bent inward like listening things. Then the screen went white. The bulb burst. Smoke filled the room. When it cleared, the reel had melted into black curls of plastic. Greer coughed. "What the hell did we just see?" Mara stared at the smoke rising from the projector. "Proof," she whispered. "They made a recording that could still speak." They left the facility before nightfall. The forest around it was unnaturally quiet, the soil underfoot soft as breath. Back in the car, Greer broke the silence. "If that tape can make trees bend, what's it doing to people who hear it?" Mara didn't answer. The recorder on the seat beside her had begun to hum, faintly, on its own. Twilight pressed down on the hills when Detective Mara Keene reached the last address connected to Dr. Judith Harlan, a farmhouse crouched beneath wind-stripped oaks on the western ridge. The mailbox still bore the faint stencil J.H., the letters rusted to ghosts. Her tires crunched over gravel. The house had no lights, but smoke drifted faintly from the chimney, as if it had remembered how to breathe only moments ago. She knocked once. The door opened an inch. A woman's voice, soft, cautious. "You came sooner than I expected." Mara showed her badge. "Dr. Harlan." The door widened. The woman standing there was older than the voice suggested, silver hair drawn back, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. She wore a wool sweater that looked older than either of them. "Come in," Harlan said. "The night carries sound up here." Inside, the room smelled of cedar and dust. Books stacked along every wall, their spines faded. Acoustic physics, phenomenology of sound, waveforms of consciousness. On the mantel above a cold fireplace sat a single-framed photo, the Holloway twins, smiling in grainy black and white. Mara stopped. "Where did you get that?" Harlan's expression didn't change. "From the orchard." I took it. "You were there in 1963. I was everywhere the project required." They sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp between them. Outside, wind worked through the eaves with a long, low hum that made the glass vibrate. "You worked for Willow Creek," Mara said. Harlan nodded. "I founded it. You experimented on children. I recorded resonance. The twins could mimic tones most instruments can't produce. When they sang together, they formed a standing wave, sound that didn't dissipate. The sheriff's boy heard it first. The ground answered. Mara stared. Answered. You've been hearing it yourself, haven't you? Harlan's voice softened. That low frequency in the tape, under the sheriff's confession. It isn't electrical noise. It's the echo left in the soil when energy refuses to die. Mara's fingers tightened on the table edge. You're telling me you captured ghosts. I'm telling you we built a microphone sensitive enough to register grief, and then we pointed it at children and asked the ground to answer. Silence pressed between them. Harlan rose and crossed to a locked cabinet. She returned with a metal case no larger than a lunchbox. Inside lay a headset, its ear cups wrapped in copper wire. This is the original receiver, she said. Paul Bennett used it the night the twins disappeared. He was supposed to listen, record, report what he heard. Instead, he followed the signal into the orchard. The wave intensified. The girls vanished. The ground sealed itself. She looked up. You found the burial site? Mara nodded. We uncovered remains. 2 small bodies. Harlan's mouth trembled. Bodies, yes, but not the voices. The resonance never stopped. Mara leaned forward. Why hide it? Why bury the tapes, the evidence? Because the government wanted weapons that could alter emotion at a distance. We were meant to map grief, not weaponize it. When the sheriff realized what his son had helped awaken, he sealed the pit and killed the funding. I disappeared. Harlan touched the receiver's wire with trembling fingers. They kept sending agents to erase what was left. One of them must have found you at St. Dunstan's. Mara remembered the man in the gray coat, the one who'd called himself Mora. He told me to walk away, she said. He's one of theirs, Harlan murmured. He doesn't age the way we do. Lightning flared beyond the windows. The hum deepened, rolling through the floorboards. Dishes rattled. Mara stood. What's happening? The resonance is close, Harlan said. They've been trying to reach anyone who'll listen. The twins? Harlan nodded once. You reopened the case, detective. You reopened the channel. The lights flickered. From somewhere below the house came a faint, harmonic sound. 2 notes, high and pure, weaving together. Mara felt it vibrate through her chest, gentle and terrifying. Harlan grabbed her arm. If you go back to the orchard, don't dig again. The ground remembers shape. It will try to fill what's missing. Why tell me this now? Because you'll go anyway, Harlan said simply. You've already begun to hear them. Everyone who listens long enough does. Thunder rolled overhead. The lamp flickered once more and died, plunging the room into darkness. In the brief silence that followed, Mara could still hear the twins hum, soft, layered, impossibly close. She turned toward the window. 2 reflections stared back at her, small and luminous, standing just behind her shoulder. Then the power returned, and they were gone. Harlan sat motionless, hands clasped. Now you understand why I stayed hidden. Mara swallowed the metallic taste in her mouth. No, she said quietly. Now I understand what you buried. Outside, rain began again, slow and deliberate, as if marking time. When Mara left the house, the road behind her glowed faintly, as though something beneath it had begun to stir. By the time Detective Mara Keene reached the valley, night had drained the color from everything. The orchard lay ahead under a low ceiling of clouds, the trees rising out of fog like half-remembered thoughts. She parked at the same gate where it had all begun. The yellow police tape flapped listlessly, brittle from rain. She ducked under it and started down the narrow path, flashlight beam cutting through the mist. Each step sounded too loud. The air held the faint vibration she'd felt at Harlan's house, a tone just below hearing, more sensed than heard. She paused at the 12th tree. The initials L+R gleamed faintly in the beam. Beneath it, the soil the forensics crew had disturbed had already settled, smooth again, as if the earth had stitched itself shut. Wind whispered through the branches, and the pitch shifted. A harmony, 2 notes weaving. Mara knelt, pressing her palm to the ground. Warm, always warm. She spoke softly, unsure whether to the soil or to herself. Lila, Rose, if you can hear me. The wind rose, bending the trees until their trunks creaked like ships at sea. A whisper threaded through the air. They hear you. Her pulse spiked. She swung the flashlight, but nothing moved. Only the rows of trees stretching into fog, their shapes swaying to an unseen rhythm. She pulled the recorder from her coat pocket and clicked it on. Detective Keene, field log, 2,200 hours, returning to primary site after contact with Dr. Harlan. Evidence suggests residual sound frequencies remain active. The machine hissed. A low hum built beneath her words, then overtook them. The ground trembled. The pitch climbed until it became a chord, 2 voices humming in parallel. Then, just as suddenly, silence. From behind her came the faint crunch of footsteps. She turned. Deputy Greer emerged from the fog, face pale, breath visible. Couldn't reach you. Thought maybe. He stopped. Hearing it too. That sound. It's coming from under us. Mara nodded. They're trying to surface. Greer swallowed. Detective, this is way past cold case territory. Everything's buried until it isn't, she said quietly. The soil at their feet shifted, small ripples like something breathing. She backed up a step. The ground split open with a low, exhausted sigh, releasing a gust of warm, sweet air that smelled of overripe peaches and something that had been trying not to rot. Greer stumbled. Jesus! Light seeped from the crack, faint, golden, like dawn leaking from beneath the world. Within it, for the briefest heartbeat, two silhouettes stood side by side, hands linked. The hum rose again, shaping words. We were never gone. Mara's eyes stung. What do you want me to do? The answer came not as sound, but as sensation, a pressure behind her ribs, like memory pushing upward. Her flashlight flickered. The recorder clicked, unprompted, beginning to play back a voice that wasn't hers. Sheriff Bennett. I sealed the pit. I thought I was saving them. But the sound won't stop. The sound is alive. The light from the crack widened, revealing the glint of metal buried in the soil, the same kind of receiver she'd seen at Harlan's house. Its wires ran deeper, pulsing faintly with every note. Mara knelt. The hum grew gentler, almost pleading. Greer grabbed her arm. Don't touch it. We don't know what it is. They've been trapped here 60 years, she said. Maybe this is the only way to let them go. Before he could answer, she reached down and pulled the receiver free. The air detonated in silence. The trees froze mid-motion. The fog solidified into stillness. For an instant, the world seemed to pause. Then a surge of light and sound rippled outward, rolling through the orchard like thunder turned liquid. Mara staggered back, covering her ears. The sound wasn't pain. It was every voice she'd ever heard layered together, memory and grief and forgiveness collapsing into one sustained chord. When it faded, the fog began to thin. The ground settled. The crack closed on itself without a trace. Greer lowered his hands. What did you do? Mara looked down. The receiver lay in her palm, dark, inert. Stop the recording, she whispered. Maybe that's all they needed. They stood in silence as dawn began to bloom behind the hills. The orchard looked ordinary now, just trees, quiet and still. Greer exhaled shakily. You think they're gone? Mara pocketed the dead device. Gone isn't the right word. She turned toward the road. I think they finally ended the broadcast. As they walked back to the car, birds began to call from somewhere deep in the trees, tentative at first, then stronger. When Mara glanced once more toward the 12th tree, she could swear she saw two small figures at its base. Faces calm, eyes closed, fading like mist in sunlight. She didn't look again. By mid-morning, the fog had lifted and left the valley raw and colorless. Ashford Hollow's orchard lay silent beneath a rinsed sky, branches black with rain. The sound that had haunted the place for 60 years was gone, but silence carried its own weight. It pressed against Mara Keene's ears until she could almost hear its outline. Deputy Greer stood beside her near the 12th tree, boots sinking into damp soil. The receiver she had torn from the ground rested in an evidence bag between them, inert metal streaked with clay. State Lab's already calling, he said quietly. They want to know what to label this under. Mara watched the tree line shimmer in the distance. Call it closure, she said. Just don't pretend it's the same thing as justice. He gave a weary laugh. That's not in the database. They started back toward the cruisers. Reporters waited behind the police tape, faces pale against camera lights. Questions rose like a swarm. What happened? Who's responsible? Are the twins really dead? Mara walked past them without a word. Some stories couldn't be told in daylight. At the station, she filed her report in deliberate handwriting. Recovered device emitting subsonic frequency. Source of auditory phenomena unknown. She stopped halfway down the page, pen hovering, then added, residual voices ceased at 0430 hours. Site stable. The chief skimmed it, frowned. No official statement until the state's done with their toys. We'll call it an archaeological anomaly. Call it whatever lets them sleep, she said. That evening she drove back through town. Windows were open for the first time in months. Somewhere a radio played an old gospel tune. 2 harmony lines, thin but steady. The sound made her throat tighten. She parked by the river and watched the water slide past the bridge, carrying bits of pale foam and leaves. For the first time since the investigation began, she felt the quiet reach all the way through her. Greer joined her with coffee and 2 paper cups. So, he said, you gonna tell the feds what really happened out there? I already did, she said. They won't believe it. They'll file it under local superstition and move on. And Harlan. Gone when I went back, Mara said. House empty, chimney cold. No prints, no trace. Maybe she went where the sound went. Greer stared out at the river. You think they're at peace now? Mara took a long breath. Peace isn't the word. They're quiet. That's enough dusk folded over the water, the sky turning the color of old film. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out the small silver bracelet they'd found in the orchard. Lilah and Rose. The metal caught the fading light, glimmering like a pulse. She set it gently on the river's edge. When it slipped into the current, the surface rippled once, twice, then smoothed. She stood there until the first stars appeared, faint pinholes in the gray. Back in town, street lamps flickered on. The courthouse clock tolled 9, each strike echoing through the empty square. Windows glowed behind curtains. Life resumed its rhythm. At the motel, she placed the now silent recorder on the nightstand. For a moment she thought she saw condensation bloom across the tape window, a fogged breath. But when she blinked, it was clear again. She lay down without undressing, letting exhaustion settle over her like another layer of dust. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured, but it was only weather now, stripped of its voices. Before sleep took her, she dreamed of the orchard one last time, daylight streaming between the trees, branches heavy with fruit. 2 girls ran ahead of her, laughter spilling back like sunlight. They reached the fence, turned, and waved before fading into brightness. When she woke, morning light pooled across the floor, warm and ordinary. The hum that had haunted her since the first day was gone. She poured the remaining coffee into the sink and stood for a moment, listening to the quiet heartbeat of the world. Then she packed her notes, left the key on the counter, and drove out of Ashford Hollow without looking back. The orchard, from the ridge, looked small, just a scatter of dark trees holding the last of the mist. For the first time, it was only land. 6 months later, spring found its way back to Ashford Hollow. The fields had greened again, and the orchard, untended since the excavation, had begun to bloom as though nothing had ever happened. A roadside memorial stood near the gate. 2 small crosses, weathered, each wrapped in white ribbon. Townsfolk still left flowers there, though no one mentioned the case aloud. When asked, they said the valley finally sounded normal again. In a government lab 3 states away, the receiver from the orchard sat sealed in a glass case. A technician logged temperature, humidity, static readings, all 0. But sometimes, when the lights were off, the glass would fog from the inside. At exactly midnight, the internal sensors recorded a vibration too low for the human ear, 2 frequencies, perfectly paired. The log read, "Anomaly persists. Source undetermined." Detective Mara Keene didn't know that. She had resigned from the bureau and moved east, renting a cottage near the sea. Most mornings she walked the shoreline before dawn, a thermos of coffee in hand. The waves made a sound almost like the orchard wind, a rhythm she could bear. Her notebooks lay packed in a trunk under the bed. She hadn't listened to the original tape since leaving Ashford, though sometimes, in the hush before sleep, she imagined the sheriff's voice again, tired, remorseful, dissolving into static. The dreams came less often now. When they did, the twins were no longer standing by the orchard gate. They were walking away from it, hand in hand, toward a horizon bright with morning. One gray afternoon, she received a small padded envelope postmarked from Ashford County, no return address. Inside was a cassette tape, unmarked except for the words, "for the record." Her first instinct was to throw it away. Instead, muscle memory she hadn't consented to carried her to the closet, dug out an old tape player, and set it on the table before she even realized her hands were shaking. At first there was only wind, the sigh of distant trees. Then a single tone emerged, low and steady. A child's voice followed, soft and clear. "You stopped the song. Thank you." Then faintly, another voice overlapping, almost a whisper. "We remember you." Mara sat very still, eyes stinging. The recording ended in silence. No hiss, no hum. Just the ordinary sound of the ocean through the open window. She rewound the tape once, listening again. Not for words, but for what filled the space between them. There was nothing there but the heartbeat of the machine, the pulse of the living world. She smiled, a small, tired curve of the mouth, and switched the player off. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and rain. Far out at sea, lightning flickered. Just light this time, no voice beneath it. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and watched the tide come in, the surface smoothing every mark the night had left. Some stories don't end, she thought. They quiet down enough to let you breathe again. And that, at last, was enough.